The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Bragg training facility as Maria Santos adjusted her worn baseball cap and checked her watch. 5:30 a.m. sharp. The shooting range stood empty except for the distant sound of maintenance crews preparing for another day of intensive military training. She preferred these quiet hours before the chaos began, when she could focus without curious eyes watching her every move. Maria had been coming to this range for 3 months now, ever since her transfer to the base's logistics department. To most people, she appeared to be just another soft-spoken civilian contractor who worked in supply management. Her slight frame and gentle voice made her nearly invisible among the sea of uniformed personnel who moved through the base daily. She wore simple clothes, spoke only when necessary, and kept her head down while completing her paperwork. But every morning before her shift began, Maria would slip onto the training range with her personal equipment. She had special permission from Colonel Harrison, though she had never explained exactly why she needed it. The colonel had simply nodded when she submitted her request, as if he understood something that others did not. Today felt different somehow. Maria could sense tension in the air, though she could not pinpoint exactly what caused it. She had heard whispers in the hallway yesterday about new recruits arriving for advanced training. Elite soldiers from various branches were being brought together for a classified program that no one seemed willing to discuss openly. She set up her equipment with practiced efficiency. Her rifle case opened to reveal a custom-built precision weapon that looked far more advanced than standard military issue. Next came her spotting scope, rangefinder, and a small notebook filled with calculations written in her neat handwriting. Everything was arranged with military precision, though she worked so quietly that even the morning birds seemed louder than her movements. Maria began her routine with breathing exercises, settling into the familiar rhythm that had become second nature over the years. She loaded a single round and settled into position, her body automatically finding the perfect stance. The target stood 800 meters away, a distance that would challenge most trained snipers. For Maria, it was simply her warm-up shot. The rifle barely seemed to move when she fired. The sound echoed across the empty range, followed by absolute silence. Through her scope, she could see the perfect center hit on the target. She allowed herself a small smile before reloading and adjusting her position for the next shot. What Maria did not notice was the group of men who had arrived early for their own training session. They stood behind the observation building, watching through binoculars as this mysterious woman consistently placed shots in patterns that defied belief. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and shook his head in amazement. "Who is that?" whispered Private Jackson, one of the newest members of their unit. "Nobody knows," Rodriguez replied. "She shows up every morning before dawn and shoots better than anyone I've ever seen. Colonel Harrison says she has clearance, but won't tell us anything else." The group consisted of 12 elite soldiers who had been selected for a new special operations program. They had arrived at Fort Bragg expecting to train with the best of the best, but none of them had expected to see this level of skill from someone who appeared to be a civilian contractor. Captain Stevens, their commanding officer, studied Maria through his own binoculars. He had been in special operations for 15 years and had worked with some of the most skilled shooters in the military. What he was witnessing defied his understanding of marksmanship. The woman was not just hitting targets consistently, she was placing shots in patterns that suggested tactical awareness and combat experience that went far beyond typical training. "She's shooting a modified M24, observed Sergeant First Class Thompson. "But look at those modifications. That's not standard equipment." "Nothing about this is standard," Stevens replied quietly. Maria continued her routine, unaware that she had gained an audience. She moved to longer distances, adjusting her scope and calculating wind speed with quick mental math. 900 meters, 1,000 meters, then finally 1,200 meters. Each shot found its mark with mechanical precision, but it was not just her accuracy that impressed the watching soldiers. It was her methodology. She moved between positions with fluid grace, never exposing herself unnecessarily. Her reload speed was faster than most military personnel they had trained with. Most importantly, she demonstrated an understanding of tactical positioning that suggested real combat experience. "Sir," Private Jackson whispered to Captain Stevens, "I think we need to know who she is." Stevens nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. Their new unit was supposed to represent the pinnacle of military training and capability. If there was someone on base who could outshoot his best snipers, he needed to understand how that was possible. As Maria packed up her equipment, the soldiers quickly moved to intercept her path back to the main building. They positioned themselves casually near the exit, hoping to get a closer look at this mysterious marksman. Maria noticed them immediately, though she gave no outward sign of recognition. Years of training had taught her to assess threats and friendly forces without appearing to do so. She could tell by their positioning and body language that these were special operations personnel. Their gear, their posture, and their alert awareness marked them as elite soldiers. She approached the exit at her normal steady pace, equipment bag slung over her shoulder. Her steps made no sound on the concrete walkway. As she passed the group, Captain Stevens stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "I'm Captain Stevens. I couldn't help but notice your shooting this morning. Very impressive." Maria stopped and turned to face him. Her expression remained neutral, though her eyes quickly assessed each member of the group. "Thank you, Captain. I hope I wasn't interfering with your training schedule." Her voice was soft and respectful, with just a hint of an accent that Stevens could not immediately identify. She seemed genuinely concerned about causing any problems, which was not the attitude he expected from someone with her obvious skills. "Not at all," Stevens replied. "We were just curious about your background. That was some exceptional marksmanship." Maria's smile was modest and slightly embarrassed. "I just enjoy target shooting. It helps me relax before work." Private Jackson stepped closer, his curiosity overcoming his training in protocol. "Ma'am, I've been shooting since I was 12 years old, and I've never seen accuracy like that. Where did you learn?" Maria's expression did not change, but Stevens noticed that her body language shifted almost imperceptibly. She was suddenly more alert, more ready. It was a subtle change that only someone with extensive combat experience would recognize. "My father taught me when I was young," she replied simply. "We lived in a rural area where hunting was necessary for food." It was not exactly a lie, but Stevens could sense there was much more to the story. The equipment she carried was worth more than most civilian shooters could afford. Her movements and awareness suggested professional training that went far beyond hunting with her father. "What branch did you serve in?" asked Sergeant Thompson, making an assumption that seemed logical given what they had witnessed. Maria tilted her head slightly, as if confused by the question. "I haven't served in the military, Sergeant. I work in logistics and supply management." The group exchanged glances. It seemed impossible that someone with no military training could demonstrate the level of skill they had just witnessed, yet Maria's demeanor suggested she was telling the truth, at least partially. "Well," Stevens said finally, "if you ever decide you want to try some different types of shooting, our unit is always looking for skilled marksmen to train with." Maria nodded politely. "That's very kind of you to offer, Captain. I should get to work now. Have a good training session." She walked away with the same quiet efficiency she had shown throughout the encounter. The soldiers watched until she disappeared into the main administrative building, then gathered in a tight circle to discuss what they had just experienced. "There's no way she's just a civilian contractor," Jackson said immediately. "Agreed," replied Thompson. "But if she's military or former military, why wouldn't she admit it?" Stevens was quiet for a moment, thinking through the possibilities. Maybe she can't admit it. There are programs and units that officially don't exist. People who work in those areas often maintain civilian covers. You think she's CIA or some other agency? Rodriguez asked. I think we need to be very careful about asking too many questions, Stevens replied. But I also think we need to find out more about Maria Santos. How do you know her name? Jackson asked. Stevens smiled grimly. I read it on her range permission form when she signed out. Colonel Harrison keeps those forms in his office, and I happened to see it when I was meeting with him yesterday. The group began their own training session, but their minds remained focused on the mysterious woman who had demonstrated skills that challenged their understanding of what was possible. Throughout the morning, they found themselves looking toward the administrative building, wondering what Maria Santos was really doing at Fort Bragg. Inside the logistics office, Maria sat at her desk completing inventory reports with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything else. Her computer screen showed spreadsheets filled with supply numbers and equipment requests. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be: a dedicated civilian contractor ensuring that the base operations ran smoothly. But Maria's mind was not entirely focused on her paperwork. She had recognized the soldiers who approached her that morning. Through her own research and observation, she knew they were part of a new special operations unit being formed at Fort Bragg. She also knew that their training program was designed to identify and develop the most elite military personnel in the country. What concerned her was that they had noticed her morning routine. For 3 months, she had been careful to maintain a low profile while keeping her skills sharp. The morning shooting sessions were supposed to be her secret time, a way to stay ready without attracting attention. Now that attention had found her anyway. Maria saved her work and walked to the break room for coffee. Through the window, she could see the training range where the Special Operations Unit was now conducting their own exercises. Even from this distance, she could assess their movements and tactics. They were good, very good, but she had seen better, and more importantly, she had been better. The question now was whether her cover would hold under closer scrutiny. Maria had spent years building her civilian identity, creating a background that would withstand casual investigation. But if military intelligence decided to look deeper into her history, they might find inconsistencies that would lead to uncomfortable questions. She returned to her desk and opened a secure email account that she accessed only when necessary. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as she considered whether to report this contact to her handlers. The decision could change everything about her current assignment. Meanwhile, on the training range, Captain Stevens was beginning to understand that his unit might be sharing the base with someone whose skills exceeded their own. The realization was both humbling and intriguing. In his experience, that level of ability came only through extensive combat experience, combined with natural talent and intensive training. The mystery of Maria Santos was becoming more compelling with each passing hour. Stevens made a mental note to have a longer conversation with Colonel Harrison about the civilian personnel working on base. There were clearly things happening at Fort Bragg that went beyond the normal scope of military operations. As the day progressed, both Maria and the Special Operations Unit went about their respective duties. But the brief encounter that morning had set in motion a series of events that would soon reveal truths that some people preferred to keep hidden. The afternoon sun was beginning to set when Maria finally completed her work for the day. She gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the office, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges to her carefully maintained cover identity. What she did not know was that Captain Stevens had already begun asking questions about her background, and that those questions would soon reach people who understood exactly who Maria Santos really was and why she was at Fort Bragg. The next morning arrived with an unexpected twist that would change everything Maria had carefully constructed over the past 3 months. She arrived at the range at her usual time, but found Captain Stevens already there, setting up his own equipment alongside what appeared to be an informal competition course. "Good morning, Maria," Stevens said casually, as if their previous day's encounter had made them old friends. "I hope you don't mind if we share the range this morning. My team wanted to get some extra practice before our official training begins." Maria paused at the entrance, quickly assessing the situation. The course Stevens had set up was not standard military training. It involved multiple targets at varying distances, some stationary and others designed to move when triggered. This was advanced tactical shooting that went far beyond basic marksmanship. "Of course, Captain," she replied with her characteristic quiet politeness. "I can practice at a different time if you need the full facility." "Actually," Stevens said, his tone becoming more serious, "I was hoping you might be willing to help us calibrate our course. We could use someone with your level of accuracy to test whether our targets are properly positioned." It was a reasonable request on the surface, but Maria could sense the underlying test. Stevens was not just asking for help. He was trying to better understand her capabilities. She had two choices: decline and risk appearing suspicious, or participate and risk revealing more than she intended. "I'd be happy to help," Maria said finally, setting down her equipment bag. What she did not expect was the level of sophistication in the course Stevens had designed. As she studied the layout, Maria realized this was not typical military training. The target positions, the timing mechanisms, and the shooting positions all suggested scenarios that would be encountered in highly classified operations. Stevens handed her a tablet showing the course specifications. "We need someone to run through this and tell us if the difficulty progression makes sense. Start with Position 1 and work your way through all 12 stations." Maria studied the course layout on the tablet. Position 1 required engaging 3 targets at 400 meters while moving between covered positions. Position 2 involved precision shooting at 800 meters with wind compensation. By Position 12, the scenario required engaging multiple moving targets while under simulated enemy fire. "This is quite advanced," Maria observed quietly. "Yes," Stevens replied, watching her reaction carefully. "We're training for specialized missions that require exceptional skill levels." Maria nodded and moved to the first position. She could feel the eyes of Stevens's entire unit watching her from the observation area. Private Jackson stood with his mouth slightly open, still amazed by the previous day's demonstration. Sergeant Thompson held a stopwatch, ready to time her performance. The first station seemed almost simple after Maria's usual practice routine. She engaged all 3 targets in rapid succession, placing center mass hits while moving smoothly between cover positions. Her movement was fluid and tactical, showing awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. 12 seconds, Thompson called out. Previous best time was 18 seconds. Stevens made notes on his tablet, but Maria could see his expression growing more serious. She was not just beating their times. She was demonstrating movement and tactical awareness that suggested extensive combat experience. Station 2 required Maria to calculate wind speed and direction, then compensate for long-range shooting. She spent 30 seconds studying the environment, reading wind patterns from grass movement and flag positions. Her first shot at 800 meters hit dead center. Her second and third shots created a grouping that could be covered by a quarter. "How did you calculate that wind compensation so quickly?" asked Sergeant Rodriguez, who had approached from the observation area. "Experience with outdoor shooting," Maria replied simply, though her calculation had actually been based on formulas learned in advanced sniper training. As she progressed through the course, Maria found herself facing increasingly complex scenarios. Station 5 required her to identify and engage targets that appeared only briefly, simulating urban combat situations. Station 8 involved shooting from unconventional positions, including upside down and around barriers. It was at Station 10 that Private Jackson made the observation that would change everything. The scenario required Maria to coordinate multiple elements simultaneously. She had to provide overwatch for an imaginary team while engaging priority targets and calling out tactical information. As she worked through the exercise, her quiet voice became more authoritative, using terminology and procedures that were distinctly military. Tango down, 200 meters northeast. Alpha team, you have clearance to advance. Be advised, possible sniper position in the building at 3 o'clock. Her voice carried the confidence and precision of someone who had coordinated real operations under fire. This was not someone playing a training exercise. This was someone drawing on actual combat experience. Jackson lowered his binoculars and turned to Stevens with wide eyes. "Sir," he whispered, "that's Ghost Recon." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Stevens felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. Ghost Recon was not just an elite unit. It was a program so classified that its existence was denied by official channels. The operators who worked in Ghost Recon were among the most highly trained Special Forces personnel in the world, and their identities were protected at the highest levels of national security. "Are you certain?" Stevens asked quietly. Jackson nodded emphatically. "My brother served with the 75th Rangers before he got recruited for special assignment. He couldn't tell me details, but he described exactly this kind of tactical awareness and shooting ability. He said Ghost Recon operators move like civilians but think like battlefield commanders." Stevens looked back at Maria, who was completing Station 10 with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the exercise. She appeared completely unaware that her cover had been penetrated, but Stevens was beginning to understand that Maria Santos was aware of far more than she ever let on. The realization created an immediate problem. If Maria was indeed a Ghost Recon operator, then she was at Fort Bragg for reasons that went far beyond logistics and supply management. Her presence meant there was a mission or operation that required someone with her specific skills, and Stevens' unit might be unknowingly interfering with classified activities. "What do we do?" Jackson whispered. "We finish this exercise and then we have a very careful conversation," Stevens replied. Maria completed the course in record time, demonstrating skills that exceeded anything Stevens had seen in 15 years of special operations. Her final score was not just better than his team's best performance, it was better than anything he had thought humanly possible. As she walked back toward the observation area, Maria could sense the changed atmosphere among the watching soldiers. Their casual curiosity had been replaced by something that felt more like recognition and concern. She had pushed too hard, revealed too much. "That was exceptional," Stevens said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you, Captain. I hope the calibration was helpful for your training." Stevens studied her face, looking for any sign that she understood what had just transpired. Maria's expression remained politely interested, giving nothing away. "Maria," Stevens said carefully, "I think we should talk privately." For the first time since he had met her, Stevens saw a flicker of something other than mild politeness cross Maria's face. It was there and gone in an instant, but he recognized it as the look of someone calculating tactical options. "Of course," Maria replied, "though I should get to work soon." "This won't take long." Stevens led Maria to a small office adjacent to the range, closing the door behind them. They sat across from each other at a simple metal table, each waiting for the other to speak first. "My team thinks they recognize your operational style," Stevens said finally. "I'm not sure what you mean," Maria replied, though her voice carried a note of caution that had not been there before. "Maria, we're all professionals here. I'm not trying to compromise anyone's security, but I need to understand if our presence here is interfering with something important." Maria was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Stevens could see her mental calculation process, and he realized she was deciding how much truth she could afford to tell. "Captain Stevens," she said finally, There are things happening at this base that go beyond normal military operations. I think you already know that. I'm beginning to understand that. Yes. Your unit's training program is not coincidental. The timing, the location, the specific skills you're developing, none of it is random. Stevens felt a chill as he realized the implications. Are you saying our program is connected to whatever brought you here? Maria's small smile was neither confirmation nor denial. I'm saying that Fort Bragg was chosen for your training for very specific reasons. Some of those reasons are becoming relevant sooner than expected. Before Stevens could ask for clarification, an alarm began sounding throughout the base. Both Maria and Stevens immediately stood, their bodies automatically responding to the signal that indicated a real emergency rather than a training exercise. All personnel report to stations immediately. This is not a drill. All personnel report to stations immediately. Maria's demeanor changed instantly. The soft-spoken civilian contractor disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with military precision and authority. She checked her watch and headed for the door. "Maria, wait!" Stevens called. She turned back, and Stevens saw that her expression was now entirely different. This was the face of someone who had operated in dangerous situations and made life-and-death decisions under pressure. "Captain, I suggest you get your team ready for immediate deployment. Real deployment." "What's happening?" "Something that your unit was specifically trained to handle, even though you didn't know it at the time." Stevens felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. His unit's training had focused on urban combat, hostage rescue, and counterterrorism operations. They had been told it was general preparation for potential overseas assignments, but Maria's words suggested a more specific purpose. "How do you know what we've been trained for?" he asked. Maria paused at the door, considering how much she could reveal. "Because I helped design your training program, Captain, and because the situation we've been preparing for just became active." She left the office, moving with purposeful speed toward the main administrative building. Stevens stood frozen for a moment, processing the implications of what she had just told him. Then his training took over, and he ran toward his team's staging area. Within minutes, the base was in full emergency response mode. Stevens found his unit already assembling their gear, responding to years of conditioning that made preparation automatic. But they were preparing without knowing what they were preparing for. "Sir, what's the situation?" Thompson asked as Stevens approached. "I don't know yet, but I think we're about to find out what we've really been training for." Across the base, Maria had reached her real workspace, located 3 floors below the logistics office in a section of the building that did not appear on any public maps. Her access card opened doors that few people even knew existed, leading to a command center equipped with technology that was years ahead of anything publicly acknowledged. Colonel Harrison was already there, along with several other personnel that Maria recognized from various classified programs. Large screens showed satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and real-time intelligence data from multiple sources. "Status report," Maria said, as she took her position at a workstation that was clearly designed for her specific use. 3 hours ago, a terrorist cell took control of the Caldwell Medical Center downtown. Harrison replied. 67 hostages, including a congressional delegation that was visiting the children's cancer ward. The terrorists have made it clear they're willing to kill civilians to achieve their objectives. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up building schematics, personnel records, and tactical assessment data. Local law enforcement response? "Surrounded the building but can't get close enough to gather useful intelligence. The terrorists have professional training and equipment." "This is not a random attack." "Foreign intelligence?" "We believe so, but haven't confirmed the source yet. What we know is that they specifically chose a target that would force us to respond with our best available assets." Maria studied the data flowing across her screens. The situation was exactly the type of scenario that Stevens's unit had been training to handle, though they had believed their exercises were hypothetical. "Recommendation?" Harrison asked. Maria looked up from her workstation, her expression calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Deploy the new Special Operations Unit immediately. They've been training for exactly this scenario for 6 months. They don't know that. They'll figure it out quickly enough. Captain Stevens is very smart." Harrison nodded. "What about you?" Maria was already reaching for equipment that had been stored in a secure locker beside her workstation. Her civilian clothes would be replaced by tactical gear that looked far more familiar on her frame. "I'll provide overwatch and coordination. Someone needs to make sure they understand what they're really facing." As Maria prepared for an operation that would finally reveal her true identity, Captain Stevens was receiving mission orders that confirmed his growing suspicions about the real purpose of their training program. The soft-spoken woman from logistics was about to become something entirely different, and Stevens was about to learn that some secrets were worth keeping until the moment when lives depended on revealing them. 20 minutes after the alarm sounded, Captain Stevens and his unit found themselves in a briefing room they had never seen before, 3 floors below the main base facilities. The existence of this command center had been completely unknown to them, yet they were being treated as if their presence there was entirely expected. Colonel Harrison stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time footage from the Caldwell Medical Center. The building was a modern facility downtown, now surrounded by law enforcement vehicles and emergency responders. But what captured Stevens's attention was the figure standing beside Harrison, wearing full tactical gear that transformed her appearance completely. Maria Santos no longer looked like a soft-spoken civilian contractor. The woman before them wore black tactical clothing with equipment that represented the pinnacle of military technology. Her helmet incorporated advanced communication systems and targeting displays. Her rifle was a weapon that Stevens had heard described, but never seen in person, designed specifically for elite special operations. Most striking was the change in her entire demeanor. Maria now moved and spoke with the absolute confidence of someone who had commanded operations in the most dangerous situations imaginable. This was not someone playing a role. This was someone returning to their natural element. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, "you are about to undertake a mission that represents exactly what you have been training for over the past 6 months. The scenario you practiced as exercises are now reality." Stevens looked around the room, noting equipment and personnel that clearly represented capabilities far beyond normal military operations. "Sir, with respect, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Maria stepped forward, her voice now carrying authority that made her previous soft-spoken manner seem impossible. 8 heavily armed terrorists have taken control of the medical center. They have sophisticated weapons, professional training, and detailed knowledge of the building layout. This was not a random attack. She gestured to the monitors, which showed thermal imaging and structural analysis of the target building. 67 hostages are being held on the 3rd and 4th floors. Among them are 12 children from the cancer ward and a 5-person congressional delegation. Intelligence indicates the terrorists are foreign operatives with specific objectives beyond simple terrorism, Harrison added. They want to force the United States to demonstrate our special operations capabilities in a public setting. Stevens felt the pieces clicking into place. This is a trap. They want to see how we respond to this type of threat. "Exactly," Maria confirmed. "Which means we have to respond in a way that eliminates the threat while revealing as little as possible about our actual capabilities." Sergeant Thompson studied the building schematics on his tablet. "Ma'am, how do we approach a building that the terrorists know we're going to attack?" Maria's smile was grim but confident. "We approach it in ways they won't expect, using tactics they won't recognize until it's too late." She moved to a detailed model of the medical center that had been constructed in the briefing room. Stevens realized this level of preparation meant the possibility of this exact scenario had been anticipated well in advance. The terrorists expect us to approach from ground level, probably through the emergency room or main entrance, Maria explained. Instead, we're going to insert from above while simultaneously creating diversions that will mask our actual assault routes. She pointed to specific locations on the model. Team Alpha, led by Sergeant Thompson, will insert via helicopter onto the roof and work downward. Team Beta, led by Sergeant Rodriguez, will approach through the underground parking structure and work upward. Captain Stevens will coordinate from the command position here. What about you? Stevens asked. Maria indicated a position on the model that seemed impossible to reach. I'll be providing overwatch from the building across the street with clear sight lines into the hostage areas. My job is to eliminate any terrorist who threatens civilian lives during your insertion. Private Jackson studied the distances involved. Ma'am, those are 800 to 1,000-meter shots through building windows. The margin for error will be 0, Maria finished calmly, which is why those shots are my responsibility. Colonel Harrison activated a communication system that connected them to law enforcement command units surrounding the medical center. Local authorities have been told that federal special operations teams are taking control of the situation. They'll provide perimeter support but will not interfere with your operation. Stevens looked at his team, seeing a mixture of excitement and apprehension on their faces. They had trained for scenarios like this, but the reality was far more complex than any exercise. Sir, he said to Harrison, my team is ready, but I need to understand something. How long has this specific operation been planned? Harrison and Maria exchanged a glance before Harrison answered. The possibility of this type of attack has been anticipated for 18 months. Your unit was specifically assembled and trained to respond to exactly this scenario. And Maria has been embedded here to provide exactly the type of support you're going to receive today, Harrison replied. The realization hit Stevens like a physical blow. Our entire training program was designed around this specific mission. Every exercise, every scenario, every skill you developed, Maria confirmed. Today you'll understand why you were pushed to achieve levels of performance that seemed excessive for normal military operations. Within 30 minutes, both teams were moving toward their insertion points. Stevens found himself in a mobile command vehicle that had been positioned 6 blocks from the medical center, equipped with communication systems that allowed him to monitor every aspect of the operation in real time. Through his headset, he could hear Maria's calm voice as she settled into her overwatch position. Ghost Actual in position. I have clear sight lines to all hostage areas. Thermal imaging confirms terrorist positions on floors 3 and 4. The codename Ghost Actual sent a chill through Stevens. He was listening to someone whose identity was so classified that even her call sign was legendary among special operations personnel. Alpha team in position on the roof, Thompson reported. Beta team in position in the underground structure, Rodriguez confirmed. Stevens studied the real-time feeds from both teams' helmet cameras. The insertion had been flawless, demonstrating skills that his unit had developed without fully understanding their purpose. Ghost Actual, I need target priority assessment, Stevens requested. Maria's response was immediate and precise. Primary threats are 2 terrorists in the east corridor of the 4th floor, armed with automatic weapons and positioned to threaten the children's ward. Secondary threats are 3 terrorists in the main hostage area on the 3rd floor. Understood. Alpha team, you have priority targets on the 4th floor. Copy that. Beginning approach now. Stevens watched through Thompson's camera as Alpha Team moved through the building with tactical precision that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Their training had transformed them into something approaching elite special forces capability. The first contact came when Alpha Team encountered the terrorists on the 4th floor. The engagement lasted 12 seconds and resulted in both terrorist targets being eliminated without injury to hostages or team members. "Alpha Team, targets neutralized," Thompson reported. Simultaneously, Beta Team was moving upward through the building, using routes that avoided the main corridors where terrorists expected them to appear. "Beta Team has visual contact with hostage area," Rodriguez reported. 3 targets, positions consistent with Ghost Actual's assessment. It was at this moment that Maria demonstrated why her reputation was legendary even among elite special operations personnel. "Beta Team, hold position. I have shots available on all 3 targets." Stevens watched through the command center's monitors as Maria's first shot eliminated a terrorist who was moving toward the hostages with an explosive device. The distance was over 900 meters, and the shot had to pass through a window opening that was barely larger than the bullet itself. Her second and third shots followed within 4 seconds, eliminating the remaining terrorists before they could react to the first target going down. "All targets neutralized," Maria reported calmly. "Beta Team, you are clear to secure the hostage area." The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes from first contact to complete resolution. Stevens realized he was witnessing a level of tactical capability that redefined his understanding of what was possible in special operations. "All hostages secure," Rodriguez reported. "No casualties among civilians. Medical personnel are treating several hostages for shock and minor injuries." Colonel Harrison's voice came through the command frequency. "Outstanding work, all teams. Begin extraction procedures." As the teams began withdrawing from the medical center, Stevens found himself processing the implications of what had just occurred. His unit had performed flawlessly, but they had done so under the guidance of someone whose abilities exceeded anything he had thought humanly possible. 2 hours later, Stevens and his team were back in the underground briefing room at Fort Bragg. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by the realization that their lives had fundamentally changed. Maria had returned to the briefing room, though she still wore her tactical gear. The transformation back to her civilian contractor persona seemed impossible now that Stevens had seen her true capabilities. "Questions?" she asked simply. Private Jackson spoke first. "Ma'am, how long have you been with Ghost Recon?" Maria smiled, and for the first time, Stevens could see genuine warmth in her expression. 12 years. I've been operational since I was 22 years old." "Your cover story, the logistics work?" Thompson asked. "Real enough. I actually do manage supply operations for several classified programs. It provides useful cover and keeps me close to operational units like yours." Stevens had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "How many operations like this have you conducted?" "More than I can count. Today was unusual because I worked with a unit that didn't know my real identity. Usually, Ghost Recon operators work alone or with teams that are fully briefed on our capabilities." "Why weren't we told?" Rodriguez asked. Colonel Harrison answered this question. "Because part of your training involved developing the ability to adapt to unexpected situations and work with assets whose capabilities you didn't fully understand. Real special operations often involve exactly that type of uncertainty." Maria nodded agreement. "Today you proved that you could perform at elite levels even when working with unknown elements. That's a capability that very few units possess." Stevens looked around the room at his team, seeing the same realization on their faces that he was experiencing. They had just participated in an operation that would never be officially acknowledged, working alongside someone whose existence was denied by official channels. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you understand what you've really been training for," Harrison replied. "Your unit will continue to develop specialized capabilities, and you'll work on operations that require the highest levels of skill and discretion." "Will we work with Maria again?" Maria and Harrison exchanged another glance before she answered. "Possibly. The world is becoming more complex, and threats are evolving in ways that require new approaches to special operations. Units like yours, working with assets like Ghost Recon, represent the future of how America responds to the most serious threats. Stevens nodded slowly. And the official story for what happened today? Local law enforcement successfully resolved a hostage situation with assistance from unspecified federal resources, Harrison said. Nothing more. Over the following weeks, Stevens and his team found themselves settling into a new routine at Fort Bragg. Their training continued, but with a different understanding of its purpose. They were no longer preparing for hypothetical scenarios. They were preparing for the next time their skills would be needed for real. Maria returned to her logistics office and her morning shooting routine, but the dynamic had changed completely. Stevens and his team now understood who she really was, and she no longer needed to maintain the fiction of being just a civilian contractor. Sometimes, after their own training sessions, Stevens would find Maria on the range working through exercises that challenged skills he was still developing. Their conversations were different now, marked by mutual respect and understanding of the serious nature of their work. "Do you miss it?" Stevens asked one morning, watching Maria consistently place shots at distances that still amazed him. "Miss what?" she replied, though she knew what he meant. "Operating under your real identity, being acknowledged for what you can do." Maria considered the question while loading another round. "Captain, the most important operations are the ones that no one ever hears about. Success in our line of work is measured by the problems that never become public, the threats that are eliminated before anyone knows they existed." She fired her shot and lowered her rifle. "Recognition is less important than results. Today's hostage rescue will save lives in ways that go far beyond the 67 people we brought home safely." Stevens understood. The operation had demonstrated capabilities that would deter future attacks while revealing nothing about the methods used to achieve those capabilities. "Besides," Maria added with a slight smile, "I like being underestimated. People don't see soft-spoken women as threats, which makes my job considerably easier." Stevens laughed, remembering his first impression of the quiet contractor who seemed to disappear into the background. "Maria," he said, "I don't think anyone will ever underestimate you again." "Good," she replied, shouldering her rifle and preparing to leave for her logistics office. "That means I'll have to find a new cover identity soon." As Stevens watched her walk away, he realized that Maria Santos, the civilian contractor, might indeed disappear, but Ghost Actual would continue operating in whatever identity best served the mission. The soft-spoken woman had been revealed as one of the most capable special operations personnel in the world, but her greatest skill remained the ability to hide in plain sight until the moment when extraordinary capabilities were needed to save lives. 3 months later, a new civilian contractor named Sarah Mitchell began working in the base maintenance department. She was quiet, efficient, and completely unremarkable. But Captain Stevens noticed that she arrived early each morning and that the sound of precision shooting could sometimes be heard from the range before dawn. Some secrets, he had learned, were worth keeping until the moment when revealing them could make the difference between success and failure. And some people were so good at their jobs that they could disappear completely until the instant when their skills became the only thing standing between innocent lives and those who would take them away.